huh? All right. Israel gets freed out of slavery and goes into the freedom of the Promised Land. On their way to the Promised Land, they decide they're not sure it's a land of promise because things have really changed. While they were slaves, they got a little bit of food, a little bit of water, enough to keep them all alive. They go into the desert, and all of a sudden, they're sort of on their own, having to rely on the world of the desert for their well-being, for the little bit of water that they can find, and for the food which is available to them, provided by the Lord. And they don't like it very much. And so then the Lord gives them the Ten Commandments to give them a sense of what their future will be like. And what we have here in the Old Testament reading, the first reading this morning, is the Ten Commandments. But you'll note that the preamble to the Ten Commandments is really critical. I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So automatically, you should be thinking, whenever you're thinking the word God, you should be thinking slavery and freedom. What is it in your life that has made a slave out of you? To whom or to what are you a slave? It really matters because we are all enslaved by a variety of things in our lives. The internal working of the Ten Commandments itself, the first four of them, of course, have to do, Martin Luther summed up the first four commandments really neat. Faith in God is active in love. Faith in God summarizes up the first four commandments, in which you need somehow, some way, to maintain a focus on the Lord and the good news in your daily living. Because if you don't, your life can oftentimes go off course and it'll no longer be a good news sort of life that you can enjoy and appreciate and have regard for, and have regard for the people around you. It's just bad news all the time. In other words, life can get to be a real downer, and you can be a real downer right along with it. The next four commandments, or the next six, are powerful reminders for us that we live in communal situations. And you know as well as I do, those of you who have lived a few years know full well that in most every group that you belong to, every society you belong to, every community group you belong to, has periods in which for 10 or 15 or 20 years, everybody will want their individual rights and their individual freedoms, and they'll want to do their own thing. Even on basketball teams in college, right? The teams that are doing really, really well will usually have one, maybe two hot dogs who will really do their thing. And then they have to decide when they get into the playoffs, do they want to continue to hot dog and maybe win, because the teams that always win in basketball are the teams that play as a team, as a community. And we run that way in our culture, as you well know. We'll go 20, 30, 40 years, very individualistic, even in our court cases and everywhere else. And that's where we are today, very individualistic. And then it will come back the other way when we realize how destructive and hurtful that can be. We'll begin to come back to a more communal orientation. You can just trace American history that way without too much trouble at all. On the first four commandments, Chris Hedges, he wrote a book, by the way, called Losing Moses on the Freeway. I would think it is not hard to lose your freedom and think of yourself as a slave when you're caught on the freeway in a traffic jam or an ice storm. All of a sudden, you are no longer free, but you are a slave to somebody else's circumstances and perhaps bad driving. He says this: we are burdened by household gods and goddesses, no longer made of clay, but all promising to fulfill us. Our computers, our TVs, our jobs, our wealth, our social status, along with the brands we wear and the cars we drive, promise us contentment in the form of identity. These household gods seem to offer well-being, health, and success. But all these gods create cults, and all these cults circle back to us eventually, to a dangerous self-worship of one sort or another, fed by forces that will ensnare and enslave us. The wonderful writer G.K. Chesterton said that most of the sins that we begin to commit happen in what he calls tremendous trifles. Let me give you an example of a tremendous trifle. I had something sticking out of my pants. A thread yesterday. And I started pulling on it. Yes, I did. And I was so fascinated. I just kept pulling. Yes, I did. I just unraveled that cuff about as good as anybody could ever unravel. And it was just hanging there flapping loose. And my wife said, "That doesn't look good." Well, that's not what she said, but that's what I'm telling you. I'm saying that. You see how a tremendous trifle ends up being a real mess. Now, this was not life-threatening or particularly hurtful. It was most amusing. I was at everyone else's expense. They had great amusement of me. And but G.K. Chesterton talks about sin and lack of obedience, in particular, to the Ten Commandments, as beginning with tremendous trifles. The little things that we say and do that we think don't matter very much, but little by little they begin to change our way of looking at life and thinking about life. The threshold, so to speak, of our ethics, the things that matter, who we are as human beings, how we shall act, whether we're going to do right things at all times or whether we're going to hedge our bets just a little bit on doing some of that stuff. And so instead of having a big moral breakdown and a huge, tremendous, obvious decay of ethics and morality and well-being in the community, it's mostly tremendous trifles, the little things. Little by little, we cave in and give in to those things which are going to be hurtful to us. So eventually our standards of behavior diminish and decrease. And you can see pretty much how that is functioning in our culture. You can certainly see that in Washington, D.C. It's not the big, humongous stuff where everything started. It was the tremendous trifles. Not that any politician ever gives in to $1 million gift to their campaign, but there's just that tremendous trifle. I'll give you a hearing to the lobbyist. By the way, K Street, where most of the lobbyists are, the nickname in Washington is Gucci Gulch. I'm told by my friends because of the shoes that most of the attorneys wear there. But anyhow, as you move into those tremendous trifles, that is what God said in the Ten Commandments, and why he did not make a tremendous trifle out of anything. He said very simply, listen, I brought you out of slavery into freedom. The question for you is, how shall you respond to that freedom which I have given you, that freedom of good news? Do you respond by being energetic and active in maintaining it and spreading it out into the people and communities you know? Or do you let the tremendous trifles nip away and take it away from you, little by little and little at a time? I was reading a survey recently, and now check this out for yourself. I don't know how you're going to test yourself, but see how well you do this week. We all lie, according to this survey that was done by a couple of universities, 1.65 times per day. 1.65 times per day. And they've identified 3 different kinds of lying, which I think is actually pretty interesting. We tell lubricating lies, to keep the conversation moving, such as when, if you ask me, how are you, I say, I'm doing fine. You know, it's a lubricant because we're moving along, so we don't have to focus on me and how I'm really doing or not doing. Okay, get the idea? Okay, another kind of lie is the logistical lie, such as, I'll be there soon, I'll be right there. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Okay? And you may be there in 10 minutes, you may be there in 20. A logistical lie. And a final one, of course, is a charitable lie, such as, of course that doesn't make you look fat. That's self-preservation. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday, as a matter of fact, and he has bulked up over the winter by his own admission, and he just said, hey, do I look fat to you? Well, you know, you're not the kind of person that is just going to say, yeah, you really look fat. What I did say was, you know, if I was you, I'd probably want to lose like 25 pounds. Something like that. Well, now, amongst the range of possibilities, you know, how hard do you want to hit? You know? And how, whether you want to keep a friend or not. But you get the idea of, you know, a charitable lie. You want to still tell the truth, you know, just want to shade it just a little bit. Well, there you go, a trifling thing. One of the things that I was reading in the Atlantic Monthly, which it started out as a trifle also. A lady hurt herself and she got workman's comp for 5 years. And she ended up on the show, The Price is Right. And on that show, she grabbed that wheel and she spun that sucker for all she was worth. The very thing that she was getting workman's comp for was her inability to lift her arm over her head and have range of motion. And yes, there were people who saw that. And then the producers, of course, followed the vacation which she won, the cruise. And guess what she was doing on the cruise? She was riding on a zip line from the top. Range of motion. Well, okay. But you see, the thing is, the sadness in all of this is that she started with a truth. She had lost her motion. She had been hurt. But then she had gotten better. And instead of telling the truth, she let the trifling little fibs begin to take on more weight. And then after you tell a little fib, you have to tell another one to cover that, and another one to cover that, and so on and so forth. And that is why the Ten Commandments become so important for us, because they remind us of the consequences of the trifling lies that we tell and the trifling ways that we live. You can't go through life as a Christian living a life of tremendous trifles unless you're doing it in a positive way, because that's the other side of the Ten Commandments, that there are little things that we do that enrich each other and enrich each other's ethical standards and qualities of life, as opposed to diminish them. And that is why the Ten Commandments start with, remember who I am, the Lord your God, who brought you out of slavery into freedom. And the freedom that God offers you and me through Jesus is the freedom to use the tremendous trifles of our daily living to enrich the lives of other people, to enrich their ethical standards and raise the bar, and also to be the conscience of people who live tremendous, trifling lives. You see the good gift that you become, both as a neighbor, as a friend, as a family member. Your offer of good news is the freedom of the gospel. To be brought out of slavery into freedom. And that's the gift we've been given.